It's really good that ARC is here in Australia telling a better story, because we sure need a better story told, and we sure have a better story to tell. Australia is one of the world's truly great stories, a land long hidden from the outside world, then chosen as a dumping ground, where people rejected and despised black and white, within scarcely a century had built the most free, the most fair and the most prosperous society on earth, one indissoluble federal commonwealth under the Crown, with an Indigenous heritage, a British foundation and an immigrant character. Yet thanks to the black armband view of history, ours is a story rarely told or whispered with a touch of embarrassment, or more often, just forgotten. A recent survey found that 47% of Australians thought that Captain Cook's ship Endeavour had arrived here as part of the First Fleet. Another, that 56% of young Australians wanted January 26 to be known as Invasion Day, even though the Marines were here to guard the convicts, not attack the locals, with Governor Phillip instructed to live in amity with the native inhabitants. When that first fleet drew into Sydney Cove, it had not come from Mars. It had come from a Britain then approaching its zenith of power and enlightenment. The Britain of Lord Justice Mansfield, who declared that the air of England is too pure for any slave to breathe. Of Lord Justice Cook, who declared to the King himself, "Be you ever so high, the law is above you." A Britain increasingly seized of the gospel truths that we are all God's children and that we should love one another as we love ourselves. So Marine or convict, they were freedom's children that came ashore that day in a version of what the Torres Strait Islanders still call the coming of the light. As Phillip wrote, there can be no slavery in a free land and therefore no slaves. When he was speared at Manly Cove trying to find Bennelong, he put it down to a misunderstanding. Successive governors insisted that Aboriginal people had all the rights of British subjects, and after the Myall Creek massacre as early as 1838, 7 whites were hanged for the murder of blacks. In preaching the first Christian sermon on this continent, the Reverend Richard Johnson took as his text, "What can I render unto the Lord for all his blessings to me?" So sent down by the best judges in England they might have been, but given land, opportunity and freedom, the first modern Australians set no limits on what they could achieve. It was that spirit of faith and optimism that drove the settlers over the Blue Mountains, created the wool industry that kept Britain warm and the colony rich, discovered gold, and within just 100 years had the world's highest standard of living, most developed democracy and most egalitarian society. Typically, the leader of the Eureka Rebellion went on, not to jail, but to become Speaker of the Victorian Parliament. Victoria pioneered the secret ballots and the payment of MPs. In South Australia, as early as the 1880s, both women and Aboriginal people could vote and run for Parliament. Senator Thomas Backup, whose father was a Chinese gold digger, was an early member of our federal parliament. One of the first Anzacs to storm ashore at Gallipoli was Trooper Yin Gan. One of our finest soldiers was Sniper Billy Singh, and it seems that one of the Aboriginal soldiers who fought and died for his country in the Great War, William John Punch, was actually a massacre survivor who'd been rescued and brought up by a settler family. Our story is not without its blemishes, but a tale of unremitting discrimination it most assuredly is not. In 1967, the referendum to count Aboriginal people in the census and to give the Commonwealth power to legislate for them recorded the biggest majority ever achieved because it was about equality. Last year, the referendum to entrench an Aboriginal voice in the Constitution was trounced, 60-40, despite the backing of big business, big tech, big sport, big philanthropy and big government, because it was about inequality. That wasn't the government protecting us from harm, but democracy protecting us from our own government. But for democracy, we would have entrenched race in the Constitution, further gummed up government, and reinforced the separatism that's the heart of Indigenous disadvantage. It was a smashing rebuff, founded on the good sense of the Australian people. And that's what we need now. More democracy, not less. If our families are to be stronger, if our schools are to improve, if our streets are to stay safe, our mental health is to improve, our power bills are to fall, our infrastructure is to modernise, our taxes are to shrink, our defences are to strengthen as they must, and if defeatism and declinism is to be put behind us, because when given a clear choice, the public nearly always knows what's best and nearly always chooses to be bigger citizens rather than to have a bigger government. It's no accident that our best modern governments, those of Hawke and Howard, the ones that most challenged Australians to be our best selves, were also our most electorally successful, because they radiated faith in an Australian people with no hierarchy of descent and no privilege of origin, entitled to be relaxed and comfortable about who we are. One country, not many, that belonged to everyone equally, with one flag, not three, and with just one national language. How can a country that's the least racist and most colourblind on earth really be a product of invasion, oppression and exploitation? My sense is that Australians are waking up to the travesty that's been foisted upon us, and that we are finally passing the point of peak woke. That's our mission here, to rekindle the faith that we are the most creative civilization, the most generous culture, and the most welcoming country on earth, and that our best days are still ahead. That's my belief, and it's our task to make it so. We call this ARC. There was another ARC, a biblical one, that saved humanity, and maybe that's our challenge too.